I'm Bridget Bardot, for all you know, your girl behind the counter, and today we are going to be having a great interview with Bill Oberst Jr., who is the star of Dis by Adrian Corona. I would love to talk a little bit about the film before even getting into anything. Dis is a film by Adrian Corona, which is about a man called Ariel, played by Bill Oberst Jr., who is walking through the forest, and then he sees a beautiful, beautiful lady. And that's all I'm gonna say about that, because you're gonna have to watch this film. Um, it is an absolute joy, by the way. So first off, I would like to say that this is not a strictly like narrative film that focuses on like a serial killer or like an alien invasion or like a monster that's gonna come out of a closet. It's a lot less concrete than that. It's much more up to interpretation. And it's the brilliant kind of intersection where art house meets horror. If you've seen a movie called Begotten, it is very similar to that in the fact that it is so like esoteric, and I will even admit like I don't think I quite got it the first time that I watched it. I understood a tone and I understood that it was like genuinely really upsetting for me. um but I also like don't think I could like give a concrete explanation or do a review after watching that film. It's just it's a film that I get a different interpretation from every time I watch it. And I think that is definitely due to the brilliant performances by Bill Oberst Jr. and Laurie Jo Hendricks and the rest of the cast. Um, some great cinematography and some chef's kiss, fantastic, fantastic set design. I am a huge, huge sucker for like using like awesome sets and awesome locations, and you'll hear a lot more about this in the interview, but the way that they did this location was freaking brilliant. So if you have not seen Dis, watch it. It's an hour long. It's only an hour. Just pause this video. I will wait here. I live in this YouTube space now. So pause the video, watch the movie, and then watch this interview. But in case you want to watch the interview before watching the movie, we don't give a ton of spoilers, but I would highly suggest watching the movie beforehand. And it's also free in the United States of America. I don't know about other territories, but it's free there, so no excuses, guys. So without further ado, here is the brilliant Bill Oberst Jr. I'm Bridget Bardot, for all you know, your girl behind the counter, and today I have the absolute pleasure of speaking to Bill Oberst Jr., who played Ariel in Dis. It's one of my favorite films this entire quarantine. I can gush about it like all day. Just thank you so much for joining us, Bill.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And as we go along, I want to ask you why, in particular, you enjoyed this strange, dark film during quarantine, and if you think your impressions of it in another time would have been different. But that's the part where I interview you, which will come
Ooh,
later.
I'm excited. Being put in the hot seat. So, let's talk specifically about the film first. So, much of Dis takes place in this relative silence, and it features a lot of like intense walking. I don't believe there's really very much dialogue until the 20-minute mark, but there's a quiet intensity and a real magnetism in your characters. And I find that a lot of the roles you take require very physical intensity, especially Take This Lollipop comes in mind. How do you bring a presence to a role like Ariel that requires more of a quiet internal performance?
I wish there had been no dialogue.
Ooh.
I don't like dialogue. Most of life is done with looks, particularly with couples, people who've been in relationships. You watch them eat or interact, and very much is done with nonverbal signals. So I think most films are overwritten, and I lobby to have more dialogue taken out of this than is there. So Adrian and I almost made a completely silent film. As for the physicality, I don't like my body. I've never liked it or been comfortable in it. I always wanted to be different, which maybe everybody is. It feels that way. But film has been a way for me to force myself to become comfortable in the shell that I live in. And so, for that reason, I don't deify my body or glorify it, if that makes any sense. It's not a thing that I lift up or put on a pedestal. I like it because I live in here, but I don't love it, and I don't feel the need to always be worried about whether it's presented in the most flattering light. And so I enjoy physical roles and roles, whether it's take this lollipop, which is just up here, or disc, which was the whole body, which require stress to the body. Yeah, I find that extremely liberating and a way for me, I guess, personally, to be more comfortable in my own skin. It's a bit masochistic, I guess.
It's absolutely fascinating. I don't know about masochistic, but it's fascinating to hear about your process. But going on the masochism, it is mentioned on the IMDb page that there's like an X shaped kind of like torture device that you're on, which was built for, I believe, an art director that might be taller than you. So the device itself was physically, like, apparently quite painful. How did you work around that, and what was that like?
She was, the art director was a good 2 to 3 inches taller than me. So if you can imagine, I'm stretched out on an X. So, like, my bones had to be stretched to the limit of
Ooh,
their extension to do it.
yikes.
But it was a fortuitous accident, Bridget, because the film is about suffering,
Yeah.
and I pretty firmly believe that the core of life is suffering. Joy only exists in opposition to the suffering, which is the core of life. And that's what we were doing, was making a movie about suffering. It was really, really cold the night we filmed this.
Oh my
It was
goodness.
it was storming so bad that we wondered if we would do the scene because it was so cold. And people have parkas on outside of the shot. But all of that together was good for me because I would be cheating the writer and the director, Adrian Corona. I would be cheating the audience, and I'd be cheating you as a viewer. I'd be cheating all those people who were there to make a movie about suffering. If I had said, this is really not comfortable for me, can you cheat this so that I'm not really attached to this so that I can be comfortable? That went against everything in my power. So I said, this is beyond uncomfortable. This is painful. And so I'm going
Oh,
to accept the pain and let it be a metaphor for the suffering that's at the core of life.
wow. Powerful words, and it really shows in your performance. You can
Good.
really see the agony and just the physical pain. But there's, I would say, going a bit uh, kind of liberal with my description. There's a little bit of ecstasy in there as well.
Yes. And nobody has ever mentioned that. And thank you. There is ecstasy in that because there is a sort of surrender. It's like when you're on your way to a meeting before COVID, when we had meetings to go on the
Before
way to,
time.
and you fear you're going to be late and you're trying to dart in and out of traffic. And then the fatal moment comes and you see the clock and you realize, I'm not going to make it. And you know that the fact that you're not going to make this meeting may have very bad consequences for you, but you just accept that you're not going to make it. And so at this moment, Ariel in the film, he's in a hell of his own making, literally and figuratively. It's his fault. And he's accepting that at that moment. Um, yeah, there is a little bit of a weird ecstasy along with the pain of what he's surrendering to.
Yeah, and it really shows. How were you approached about the role? Just curious.
Adrian, who lives part time in Texas and part time in Mexico, contacted me and he said, I have a very strange role and it involves mysticism and Dante's Inferno and literature. Would you like to read it? And by the way, it has religious overtones. So it's like, bing,
Wow.
bing, bing. That's all the stuff that I like. So we met down from my place in LA at a little coffee shop called the Bourgeois Pig. And I remember meeting Adrian and looking over this script and connecting with him. He's extremely intense. And I knew that he wanted to make a movie that wasn't what he thought people would like, but what was inside of him. And he said something to me that I've never forgotten, and I've repeated since. He said, some people create to get attention. Other people create to relieve tension. He said, I am a person who has to create. This script is not because I wanted to write it, it's to relieve the tension within me. And he said, I see that in you as an actor, and that meant a lot to me.
That's incredibly profound. I think that's a profound statement that really shows in the film. It's a film that is, I would personally say, like, quite deep and quite patience inducing, but it's wonderful in that, in the fact that you have to be so patient with it, and it gives such quietness and such intensity. um Mentioning kind of the physical pain and how you worked with the set and how cold it was, it mentions on the IMDb page that you were filming in an actual mental asylum. Did you find that the location added to your performance?
The location was extreme, Bridget. It was hard to get to begin with. Some of the shots we had to go 7 to 10 miles up a mountain with cameras on
Oh,
the back of
wow.
burros. We could drive to the asylum, but it was still a hike from there. It was abandoned, so there was real graffiti, and the art department added some graffiti which fit in with the mythology of the mandrake to that. But it wasn't a set, and we were in a very lonely, isolated, somewhat dangerous place up on a precipice. Yeah,
Ooh.
it definitely added to it. It was quite spooky.
Do you mind if I ask you about the danger? How was it dangerous?
We were in a dangerous part of Mexico at the time that we were filming. We had to have police escort to and from the set because of the state that we were filming in and some of the activity that was going on there at the time. It was also dangerous because we're an independent film crew and we're in an old building which has not been tested for safety,
Yeah.
and we're kind of feeling our way. And I'm on the edge of the top,
Oh.
peeking over and looking down. And if I go too far, I fall. There is no safety net. There's none of
Yeah.
that. When we're in the place which is my cell, it's really cold, really wet. The
Ooh.
floor is really slippery. And I look up, and there are pieces of the ceiling sort of kind of dangling. They're
Oh.
still there, but they're kind of dangling. And so the whole thing was a really good metaphor for what Ariel was going through. There was danger all around. It's physically the most grueling shoot I've ever done, no contest.
Wow. I just What an amazing story. Just the fact that there were, like, pieces of building that could have possibly fallen on you. I personally couldn't have worked in, like, that kind of condition, but just that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Um Going into a bit about the ambiguous nature of the film and backstory a little bit. So Ariel's backstory is a little bit ambiguous. Is there an official backstory to the character? Did you make one up, or did you try to be more present?
I did make one up for myself, but it wasn't necessary because what Adrian had written, which is what goes on in our own minds when we try to piece together the story of our lives. It can change from time to time, depending on the age we are and what we choose to remember and what we choose not to. And I don't trust memory anyway. I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of what we think we remember are just pieces our mind has put together to try to tell a story. So yes, there was a structured backstory for which I had to pull with pliers out of Adrian because he's so reticent. He's so reticent. But I knew kind of what had happened, and but we wanted the viewer to decide that too. And it's so unusual to hear you say that you like the ambiguity because you go to IMDb and you look at the user reviews. The critical reviews say the things you're saying. The user reviews say, I didn't understand this. It didn't make sense. There was no story. There were too many loose ends. It's stupid. Nothing happens. And I'm really fascinated that humans of the same species can look at the same piece of art and one say what you're saying and one say what they're saying. What do you attribute that to? What is it in you that makes you resonate with this weird film?
Hmm. I've always been fascinated by disturbing cinema. It's something I've been interested in since I was very young, and I've always gravitated towards horror. But I've also always gravitated towards art house, which has more ambiguity and a lot less like these are the plots that go forward or here's the monster. And I feel that this film combines the two expertly. The closest thing I can think of to this is a movie called Begotten, which a critic called Susan Sontag, she did Notes on Camp, loved. And she loved it for just the ambiguity. It's also, oddly enough, a very religious story as well. It's a story all about the birth of the universe. But the mysticism and the ambiguity and the fact that you can take so much with each different viewing is something that really got me with this film and got me also with Begotten as well.
Now, you just hit on something that interests me. You mentioned the word mysticism, and both in religious terms and in my view of the world, there's a lot of mysticism, a lot of poetry, a poetic view of the world, metaphors, things that stand in for other things. But that's not common, and it's not celebrated or encouraged in our culture.
Yeah, we more, I would say, lean towards the concrete. We look for an explanation. And many movies that, like, focus entirely on plot tend to be really beloved because you know what it's about. There's hardly any ambiguity. There's hardly any new esoteric research you have to do at the end of this. Like, I remember going and watching this film and then going like, now I have to read all about like Dante's Inferno like again, and now I have to read about this, and now I have to read about that, and now I have to go into the IMDb page. There are lots of movies that will make you read about fun facts about them, but there are very few movies that will make you think I have to research this. I have to know. Or at least I don't think I'm ever gonna know the meaning. I don't think that's Adrian's goal in trying to get us into like a very concrete, like, this is the thing, this is the reason.
No, he was not making a statement. He was relieving tension. And I'm a big Ray Bradbury fan, and Bradbury said something very similar in very anatomical terms. Bradbury said that as a writer, you must, and he literally said this, you must vomit up everything that's in you. It has to come out. You have to get it out of you, and then you go through it and you see, oh, this is meaningless, but what's this? When did I eat this? What is
Yeah.
that a piece of? And that's how you began to. So I think that Adrian would not mind any interpretation of this film because he had to get it out there, and then it's for people to go through it and see what it means or it doesn't mean.
And you see so much of yourself in many of these characters. I mean, I see myself very much in Laurie Joe's character as much as I see myself in your character, as much as I see myself in some of the other characters involved. It's a film that you can't necessarily project onto, but you see so much of yourself, maybe not always the nicest parts of yourself, in the other people involved. And there's something just
That
brilliant to that.
that's wonderful for you to say that because that means that the character became universal. Oh my God, that's what I always strive for, and it's so hard sometimes. Particularly when you have a piece that's strictly made to make money or be commercial, whether they do it or not. But so these little art house films that I get to do, these are my chocolate mousse of universality.
Yeah, and there's a time and a place for movies that are much more concrete, more commercial. I sometimes I'll go and I'll be like going through Netflix and I'm like, "Oh, I just need to see something easy." But there's so much joy in watching something that's complicated, that's ambiguous, that gives a little more attention, that you have to pay more attention to, that you can't go and just say like, maybe I'll be on my phone, because you can't be on your phone for this movie. You just can't.
But Bridget, what you're saying goes against all of American capitalism, everything that social media companies want us to do. They want us to be on another tab while we're watching. And it's just fascinating to me that you would feel this way, because I've resigned myself with these art house films that critics are going to love them, but people are not. And it's gratifying for me to hear you say this.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. And it's nice to see an actor who also cares as much about film, because so many, you very rarely get to see, um, you very rarely get to question actors about like what they love about film themselves, and that's what I love with this series is I get to ask you, I get to get these wonderful in-depth answers, and there's something really brilliant about that, about being
So
able to hear your take on everything.
there are two types of directors, and most directors that I work with are your age, so they're young, brilliant people. But there are two ways to look at cinema. Cinema is a representation of reality, or cinema is reality in itself. In other words, I use cinema to represent reality, and that school of thought says that everything has to be extremely hyper realistic. And the other school, that the cinema is the reality. You create your own world, your own rules, and you invite the audience to come with you on a ride, which they may or may not enjoy. That's a really daring approach. But I'm all in favor of, in horror movies, for instance, there's a trope now since cell phones that we have to do something with the phones. Otherwise, we just call and say, "Hey, is this killer up here?" Yeah. So we have to say, "Oh, it's a girls' weekend, no cell phones," or "Hey, you won't get any reception up here, dude." There's always the obligatory thing. So I'm always like, why don't you just not have cell phones in your movie? In your universe, there are no cell phones. Why don't you have all modern technology except cell phones?
Yeah.
And and the one type of director will say, well, people know that's not true. And the other would say, that's really cool.
I mean, it's a movie. If you can have aliens, why can't you have a world where cell phones just don't exist?
Because it's what you said before, is that need, particularly I think in our culture, for the concrete. I did not enjoy this weird movie, Dice, or whatever it is, because I don't know why the character was where he was or what he was. And I don't like not knowing. It's that point of view. And I don't know that you can ever make that kind of person enjoy a movie like this.
I I would argue that you can. I've met a lot of people who, when I go and say like I like art house film, it's the universal groan, like, oh god, that's the worst. We have to watch Bergman. But like I get some people who are like that. Oh no. But I feel that there's always one piece of like ambiguous media that you're going to be like, that was the thing. I get it now. That was the thing. And I think
You
this
know
could be
what?
one of them.
There's a movie called Resolution. I don't know if you've ever seen it, by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. So I've got a scene in there, and it's a 6 minute total art house scene. Very quiet, smoking weed, expounding, beautifully done. And many people who've seen the film have said, I really like this. This is my favorite film. And I want to say to them what you just said. Then you'd probably really like art house, because what you just saw is a piece of art house. You just didn't
Yeah.
know it. Yeah, so maybe it is that you just have to be exposed to it.
You just gotta be exposed to it. You have to go and get rid of the preconceptions of I'm not gonna get this, or oh, this is too complicated for me, and just sit in the uncomfortableness. Maybe you'll never get it. That's
Yeah,
okay.
maybe we'll never get life. Maybe we'll never know much of anything.
Yeah. I mean, the world just got turned upside down, so who really knows about anything? There's nothing really concrete, especially now.
And that, to me, when you say there's nothing concrete, that opens up a whole world of creativity that I just think we should revel and wallow in, that sudden awareness, which our ancestors had,
Yeah.
that anything can happen at any time, anything can happen for any or for no reason. That's an amazing well of creativity.
Yeah, and I honestly think after this entire pandemic is over, there's going to be such a like well of creativity that gets exploded onto the world. People have been cooped up for so long in the house that it's just they're going to have all these feelings inside and just explode into art. So I cannot wait personally for post-COVID the art boom.
I will go with you on that, and I look forward to it too.
Um, but just to go and conclude a little bit about this, I do want to ask you about your about your relationship with Laurie Jo Hendricks's character. Did you guys work together on a backstory? Was it very separate? What is that relationship like?
And for you viewers who haven't seen the film, I won't give away anything that happens in the film, but I hope you will watch it based on Bridget's recommendation.
Please watch it.
Uh, Lloyd Joe Hendricks plays a character who is from my character's past, and we meet her in flashbacks. And we purposely did not discuss our two characters because our two characters seem to have intersected in the past, but for reasons that now appear different to both of them. And that's the way with a lot of relationships. When you look back on a relationship, um, it may seem to be two different things to the two different people who were involved.
Yeah.
And that was the case here. Ariel may or may not have killed her. He certainly had some strong protective feelings for her, but not strong enough protective feelings to save her from the
Yeah.
life that she was living while he was off in the army. So he has that if I loved her so much, why didn't I
Why couldn't I do
fulfill my
anything?
duty to her? Why was I selfish? So in that way, he's all of us. We always want to justify our relationship. So to answer your question, no, we did not discuss it. We let it be two completely different interpretations of relationship, and her character going a little mad, and mine convinced that he's sane, but he's not. And yeah, it was very strange. The strangest scene in the movie is when I'm painting her. It was beautiful, Bridget, because it was silent, and I have a production photo of it where we're both just absorbed in each other's eyes, and she's reaching her finger out, almost like Adam on the Sistine Chapel, and I've got paint on mine. And I was painting her body and her face, and I didn't dare ask Adrian, why am I painting her? Because I knew that he wanted the audience to discover it, and he wanted us to discover it. But I thought it was a silly scene when I read it. But it was very profound when I got into it. Something about the relationship of bodies, of people who are intimate with one another, more so than just the usual grappling that we see on screen,
Yeah.
or the gentle touching or the slapping. There are other ways to relate to one another's body, and I thought it was very strange.
And I
But his favorite over her was the blow up doll, because he had his blow up doll with him in his cabin that he was living up on the mountain, but he didn't have her.
mhm. It's yeah, I am not surprised. I kind of weirdly enough got that through the performance. There's a disconnect between you and Laurie Jo. There's a familiarity and it's really shown in the paint scene, but there's a disconnect. Like you guys are very separate people now. Like you used to be a thing, but not quite anymore. Like there's something broken about that can't, in my opinion, I don't know about Adrian's, but necessarily be fixed.
I think you're right. I don't
It's
think it can be
irreparable.
fixed. And that's part of Adrian's tragedy, is that he's made a lot of decisions in his life which are irrevocable. And when he goes to this um, asylum and he sees the female figure, who's also played by Laurie Jo, so he would recognize the body, and he decides to go into this asylum that also is irrevocable.
It's there's something really interesting about the lack of permanence in the entirety of the scene, in the entirety of the ruined asylum. It feels like there's a life lived for Ariel. Like there's definitely a life there, but you don't necessarily get to hear about it. And it's really shown in the art direction especially. like all these like interesting like esoteric symbols in each room, kind of leading you on a journey which you don't quite understand. It's what makes Dis really special, along with the performances. Both really mesh together to create a very special film and some very special performances.
I thank you for that, and the art department would thank you too. We were a team. We didn't all speak one another's language because I'm not fluent in Spanish and they weren't fluent in English. So we were interacting on a very essential level with our bodies and with our emotions and our expressions. It was a good way to create art.